heard the sound of glass clinking before I saw her smile, sharp as a blade wrapped in silk. Cruel drama at wedding. 5 words from daughter-in-law crushed me forever. The reception turned into a nightmare when those 5 words fell like salt into an open wound, daring me to sit still and let the story unfold. I noticed a sprig of rosemary floating on the foam, citrus layered with gin, and the wall clock pausing for half a beat, as if counting down to something no one else could name. Guests laughed and music swelled, jazz lilting over a heavy carpet, while I sat at the edge of the table, breathing as carefully as someone balancing on a wire. Those words echoed in my head. Not a blessing, not an apology. They were a declaration of war dressed in civility. I lifted the glass but didn't drink. The reflection showed a woman too calm for the chaos around her, as if my body remembered the discipline of surviving after widowhood long before my mind caught up. Through the tall windows, chandeliers cast cold light on porcelain plates. At the far end of the table, the woman who once called me humble to the point of embarrassment raised her glass, the diamond on her finger catching like a signal. My son forced a laugh at someone's joke while his bride laid her hand on his shoulder, the subtle squeeze reminding me who set the rhythm here. I suddenly remembered a faint detail, a bottle in her purse, its label rubbed away as if on purpose. I recited the details to myself like evidence. Tall glass, thick rim, curved lip, 4 cubes of ice, a slice of lemon, 1 sprig of rosemary. She said something light and shimmering when she placed it in front of me, words drowned by laughter. I heard the ice clink, 4 distinct drops, then caught her glance sliding toward me, waiting. I set the glass down, my hand pressed lightly against the napkin to steady the tremor. I have never loved theatrics, but I understand staging. Her perfume always entered a beat before her voice, like a prologue announcing the act. Her mother leaned in, describing new marble counters and a wine cellar with humidity sensors, repeating the word class like a prayer. I remembered nights folding laundry in a rented room, grabbing discounted soup from the supermarket before closing, holding my boy to sleep while the refrigerator hummed louder than my own heartbeat. Silence has its own vocabulary, and I had learned to listen. Tonight, her hair back. A faint dust on her fingertip. Not makeup powder, but ground from something else. A small detail, overlooked like crow's feet at the corner of an eye. Obvious, but ignored. A friend of hers stood and gave a toast, voices rising again. I let the noise wash past, clinging to the rhythm of the clock. A server placed a basket of rolls, the scent of butter tangled with the citrus and herbs, a sweetness that needed no alcohol. I thought of the times I felt dizzy after her teas, or the vitamins that looked slightly altered each time she handed me a bottle. I slipped a hand into my clutch, pretending to search for a tissue, but really just touching the spine of a small notebook. Its fabric cover was frayed, a corner pressed with a thumbnail dent. I didn't write in it here, but the feel of paper steadied me. I looked up, smiled at her with the kind of practiced warmth one learns from sales clerks. Just enough to feel like a gift, just distant enough to keep the change. A faint crash of glasses came from the far end. Someone apologized and laughter resumed. I lifted the glass, tilted it to catch the light, watching the pale pink hue shift under the chandelier. Silence had become my armor, but tonight it was also a string I was threading through beads of detail, ready to pull tight when the moment came. She leaned closer, asking what I thought of the ring ceremony. I answered, lovely, simple, elegant. Her smile widened, satisfaction flashing across her eyes like a performer hitting the right cue. I asked about the gin. She replied smoothly, aviation, with a flourish of obscure bitters, too long by a beat, like an actor who forgot to step back after a line. I was the audience, patient, holding the ticket no one else could read. I glanced at the wall clock again. The second hand swept past 12, cold and thin. At the other end, her mother raised a glass almost identical to mine, sipping slowly. I heard the glass meet the table again, heavier than it should have been. I traced the breath she released, just slightly uneven, and let it drift. I knew then I wasn't waiting for her to notice me. I was waiting for the silence to bloom. Justice doesn't always need it built. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, piecing together rent with late-night hours, folding clothes at the laundromat, or scrubbing offices after others had gone home. Each day, I wore exhaustion like a second skin, but Matthew's presence turned the weight into something bearable. He was not just a boy. He was my shadow, my little companion through endless nights. I can still see him sitting cross-legged on the floor, folding shirts too big for his small hands, insisting he could help. "Don't worry, Mama," he would say with the certainty of a child who believes words are shields. "One day, I'll take care of you." His eyes glowed with the sincerity of a promise he couldn't yet understand. That memory lives in me like a candle that refuses to go out, even when the wind howls. We didn't have luxury vacations or glossy family portraits, but we had something else: shared resilience. He learned early that meals might sometimes be soup stretched with bread, that birthdays meant a homemade cake instead of balloons and presents. Still, he never complained. He'd grin at a simple meal as though it were a feast and thank me as if I'd given him the world. Those little gestures stitched our bond tighter than any ribbon. When I lost track of time in grief, it was his laughter that pulled me back. When bills piled higher than I could face, his quiet determination reminded me I wasn't alone. He became the reason I carried every weight, the fuel behind my sacrifices. People often spoke of single motherhood as tragedy, but I never saw it that way. It was a battlefield, yes, but it was also a classroom where Matthew learned loyalty, grit, and tenderness. There were nights I sat by the window, my fingers raw from extra shifts, and wondered if I was enough. Then I'd hear the soft shuffle of his feet, his voice telling me not to worry. And in that moment, I believed again. He wasn't simply my son, he was my anchor, my partner in survival. And I held on to the image of him growing into a man who would never forget the woman who gave him everything she had. But love, no matter how pure, cannot stop time. As Matthew grew, I noticed the changes. His shoulders broadening, his voice deepening, his gaze lingering on the world beyond our little home. That was natural, I told myself, even necessary, yet part of me feared the world would chip away at the boy who once vowed to remain a gift. Still, deep inside, I worried. Promises, even the sincerest, can shatter under the weight of adulthood. Would he remember those words years later when faced with new loyalties, new loves? Or would the memory fade, like chalk washed away by rain? These questions haunted me more than unpaid bills or broken appliances. They were questions of the heart, questions no sacrifice could guarantee an answer to. The truth is, sacrifice is not a currency that guarantees devotion. It is a gamble made in the dark, where a mother gives everything, hoping the world will not teach her child to look away. And though I clung to hope, I felt an unease settling in, whispering that my greatest challenge would not be poverty or loneliness, but something far crueler. Watching the boy who once folded laundry by my side become a man who might forget why we survived at all. And so, as I sat at that wedding table, holding a glass I didn't trust, I remembered those promises, those nights, those words. They were the foundation of our bond, but foundations can crack. The glass before me wasn't just a drink. It was a test of whether everything we had built together could withstand the weight of betrayal. The question lingered, heavy as stone. Would the boy who once vowed to protect me still remember, or had he already chosen someone else's side? When Matthew first introduced Claire to me, I wanted to believe she was everything he deserved. She walked into our modest living room with confidence that filled the space, her laughter ringing like music polished for an audience. She complimented my cooking, asked for seconds, and described our home as cozy. I smiled, though the word clung to me like an insult wrapped in silk. Was cozy a kindness, or a reminder of how small our life appeared compared to hers? Her beauty was undeniable. Long hair perfectly styled, nails manicured, every outfit chosen to whisper success. Yet beneath the surface shimmer, I noticed tiny fractures in her charm. The way her eyes flicked around the room as if taking inventory. The pause, just slightly too long before she thanked me for dinner. At first, I dismissed it as nerves. She was new to the family after all. But that night, as I washed the dishes, unease pooled in my chest. Guests laughed politely, and I laughed too, brittle and thin, hiding the sting that lingered long after the dishes were cleared. The perfection she presented to the outside world, charity galas, friendly neighborhood waves, Instagram-ready photos, was flawless. To everyone else, she was the devoted wife, the generous friend, the golden daughter. To me, she was an actress rehearsing a role. And I was the one who saw her step out of character when the curtain slipped. What unsettled me most wasn't the remarks themselves, but the way Matthew began to echo her silence. He no longer defended me when her comments landed sharp. He laughed along, perhaps believing it kept the peace. My son, once so protective, seemed blind to the growing gulf between us. Every smirk she gave, every correction, every backhanded compliment pushed me further from his side of the table. There was one moment I cannot forget. During a family dinner, she poured me a cup of tea, set it before me with that same radiant smile, and said, "You'll love this blend. It's perfect for older nerves." The table chuckled lightly, but I saw it. Her eyes flicking sideways, waiting, measuring. That same flicker I would come to know too well. I sipped reluctantly, the warmth bitter on my tongue. For the rest of the night, dizziness clung to me like a second skin. It was then I realized something important. Claire's perfection was not accidental. It was deliberate, curated, sharpened like a blade. Every laugh, every compliment, every gesture was crafted to maintain her image while slowly slicing away my dignity. And though I kept silent, I understood the danger of silence when it's mistaken for weakness. Still, a part of me wondered, was I imagining it? Was I letting grief and age make me overly sensitive? Maybe she didn't mean harm. Maybe cozy truly was meant kindly. These thoughts twisted inside me, trying to convince me I was wrong. But deep down, I knew the truth. Masks are heavy, and sooner or later, even the most perfect daughter-in-law lets hers slip. And when it finally did, I had to be ready, because behind her smile was not just disdain, it was intent. And intent, once set into motion, always seeks a stage. The question lingered. What role was I being cast? And asked Matthew loudly enough for the entire table to hear. Are you sure about this? You're really ready to marry someone with such a humble background? The words sliced through the room. Conversations faltered. My son laughed nervously, brushing it aside with a joke, but I felt the sting burn deeper than I could hide. I swallowed hard, forced a smile, and kept my eyes on my plate. Inside, something cracked. It wasn't just the insult. It was the deliberate nature of it. Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing, placing me under her heel in front of the people I loved. It was no accident. She was showing me my place in this new family dynamic, and she was doing it with a glass of expensive wine in hand. That evening, I told myself not to take it to heart. Perhaps she was just protective of her daughter. Perhaps wealth had made her blunt. Yet the truth whispered otherwise. This wasn't rudeness born of ignorance. It was intentional exclusion. Every gesture, every glance confirmed it. I was not to be her equal. I was to be tolerated, managed, diminished. The wedding followed swiftly, almost too quickly, as if orchestrated to keep me from having a voice. Eleanor took control of every detail. I was given a dress code, a seat number, and nothing else. Decisions were made without my input, from the menu to the flowers. On the day itself, I arrived early and watched her glide across the venue like royalty, issuing instructions, claiming authority that was not hers to claim. I will never forget the moment she insisted on walking Claire down the aisle herself. No father in sight, just Eleanor basking in the spotlight, holding her daughter's hand as though presenting her to the world. I stood in the second row, silent, watching my son's eyes shine with the same mixture of awe and devotion he once reserved for me. He did not look back once. During the vows, Eleanor squeezed my arm and whispered, "You should be grateful. This is the best your son will ever do." Her nails pressed into my skin, leaving tiny crescent marks that outlasted the ceremony. I stared forward, imagining my late husband beside me, his hand steadying mine the way he used to, when words could not mend what was broken. At the reception, I was seated at table 6 while Eleanor sat at table 1, beside the couple, glowing under the lights. This was warfare dressed in pearls and perfume, and I was their chosen opponent. The question that gnawed at me was not whether they would continue, it was how far they were willing to go. And if Eleanor could say such words during a wedding, what venom lay waiting behind closed doors? Marriage always changes the balance in a family. But what happened after Matthew's wedding was not natural. At first, it was the small things. My calls began going unanswered. Messages replied to days later, if at all. When I did hear from him, his words felt hurried, distracted, as though I were interrupting a world where I no longer belonged. Claire was always present, her shadow stretching between us even when she wasn't in the room. I noticed the shift in his voice. He stopped calling me Mama, the name that had once carried warmth, and instead began saying Evelyn. It sounded foreign, sharp, like I had become a visitor in his life rather than the woman who had raised him. I smiled through it, pretending not to notice, but inside, each syllable cut me deeper than the last. Holidays became complicated negotiations. Invitations came late, sometimes not at all. When I did arrive, the atmosphere was staged, too perfect, like a theater production where I had been cast as an extra. Claire would monitor me closely, her smiles polite but hollow, her comments delivered with precision. "You can sit over there," she once said, gesturing to a corner of the room crowded with decorations. "It's more comfortable." My favorite spot on the couch had suddenly been claimed by her mother. Even the smallest details seemed orchestrated to remind me of my place. My favorite mug vanished one day, replaced with a sleek, modern one that was better. The meals felt different too. Her dishes dazzling in presentation, but leaving me uneasy after every bite. I told myself it was only stress, that I was imagining things, but unease turned to dread each time she handed me a cup of tea or a plate of food. The greatest pain wasn't her behavior. It was my son's silence. He laughed when she joked at my expense, brushed off my concerns when I hinted at discomfort. One evening, when I tried to tell him I felt unwell after dinner, he said gently, "You're probably eyes." Once, I delivered a casserole he had loved since childhood. Claire opened the door, glanced at the dish, and said, "Oh, how thoughtful, but we don't really eat fried food anymore. Gut health, you know." She took it from my hands and closed the door. I never saw that dish again. I told myself this was just a phase. Marriages take adjustment, I reasoned. Perhaps I was being sensitive, reading too much into gestures that weren't meant to hurt. But late at night, in the quiet of my own home, I could not ignore the truth. I was no longer the center of Matthew's world. I had become a ghost in his story, present but invisible. And still, I held on. I held on to the hope that he would see me again, not as a burden or a relic, but as the mother who once carried him through storms. Yet deep inside, I felt the ground shifting. Each small exclusion was not random. It was part of a design, a quiet exile wrapped in civility. The question I feared most pressed against my heart. How long before I disappeared from his life entirely? It began subtly, almost invisibly. After family dinners, I would feel lightheaded, a strange fog settling over me like a veil I couldn't shake. At first, I blamed exhaustion, long hours at work, the natural wear of age. But the pattern grew sharper, undeniable. Each time Claire cooked or poured me a drink, the symptoms followed. Dizziness, blurred vision, trembling hands, sudden waves of fatigue. When I ate alone at home, everything was normal. When I ate at their table, my body betrayed me. The doctors had no answers. My blood pressure, cholesterol, and vitamin levels were all within range. Stress, they suggested. Perhaps age-related changes. Their words sounded reasonable, but I knew my body. I had lived in it through grief, childbirth, and endless work. This wasn't stress. This was something foreign. Something being done to me rather than happening within me. Claire's kindness became sharper the more I questioned it. She brought me teas blended with herbs I couldn't recognize, pressed supplements into my hand with practiced sweetness. This helps with memory and mood, she'd say. The numbers didn't match. 2 tablets were missing. I hadn't taken them. Someone else had. Still, I kept my silence. What would I say? That my perfect daughter-in-law, the woman praised for her charm and hospitality, was poisoning me slowly? Who would believe it? There were days I convinced myself I was imagining everything. Days when Matthew laughed with her and held her hand, when the family toasted with wine and I sipped cautiously, forcing a smile. Maybe I was paranoid, I told myself. Maybe grief had warped my perspective. But then a new symptom would arrive. A tremor in my fingers, a blank patch in my memory. And I would know. This wasn't in my head. It was in my blood. The cruelest part was how she cloaked it all in affection. Here, Evelyn, you must be thirsty. Try this. It's soothing. Always gentle, always attentive, always with an audience to witness her care. And when I hesitated, she laughed softly. You always forget, don't you? The room would chuckle and I would smile, masking the terror rising in my chest. Each sip, each pill, each bite became a question of survival. My life no longer felt like my own. It felt like a performance directed by someone else. A performance where I was cast as the fading matriarch, the fragile woman slipping into decline. But I was not fragile. I was not fading. I was paying attention. And though I held my silence, I was gathering proof in the only way I knew how. Still, I couldn't shake one haunting thought. If she was willing to go this far, what else was she planning? My body was a battlefield, and each meal she served was another bullet. The dread pressed deeper each day. One wrong sip, one blind moment, and the story would end, not with confrontation, but with quiet erasure. And the world would never know why. I began carrying a small spiral notebook, the kind a student might tuck into a pocket, though mine was not for lessons, but for survival. Each page became a ledger of suspicion. Dates, times, meals, drinks, who handed me what, and how I felt 30 minutes, 1 hour, 3 hours later. I wrote down everything, even when it seemed ridiculous. If my hand trembled while buttoning a shirt, I logged it, swallowing. My silence was not surrender. It was strategy. Every time I feigned forgetfulness, she grew bolder. Every time I smiled and played confused, she pressed harder. And with each misstep of hers, I recorded more. One night during a family movie, Eleanor glanced at my knitting bag and said casually, "It's good you keep busy. Idle hands are the first sign of the mind slipping." Everyone chuckled. I smiled too, though inside, I etched her words like a blade into my notebook. That was not casual. That was construction. They were building a wall around me, brick by brick, preparing a story of decline that would one day trap me inside. But while they built, I sharpened. I began asking subtle questions, disguised as forgetfulness. "Did you already give me that pill, dear?" I would ask, and her eyes flickered before she laughed. "Yes, you always forget." The flicker told me everything. I was not losing my memory. They were trying to make me doubt it. And that doubt, repeated often enough, would become truth in everyone else's eyes. I even began photographing small things. Crushed pills, cups emptied into the sink, supplements with faintly different shapes. I sealed them in plastic bags and labeled them by date. My drawer at home became an archive of suspicion, a quiet arsenal. Each artifact told a story I couldn't speak aloud. but one day would reveal itself. The cruelest irony was that they believed they were winning. To them, I was slipping into their script, the forgetful matriarch too fragile to resist. What they did not know was that every act I played, every stumble I faked, was part of my counter-performance. I was letting them believe in their control while tightening the noose of their own lies. Yet silence is a heavy weapon. Some nights I lay awake, staring at the notebook on my nightstand, wondering if I had the strength to carry it long enough. Evidence without revelation is only ink on paper. But I reminded myself, time is faithful, and truth waits. My role was not to rush, but to endure. And endurance I had mastered long ago. The question haunted me in the quiet. How much longer could I play investments? Matthew remained distracted, scrolling his phone between bites, while Claire played hostess, refilling glasses and serving dishes with rehearsed grace. I ate carefully, choosing only what I served myself. I kept my eyes on her, waiting, knowing. The performance was familiar now, predictable, and I had prepared myself for the moment she would try again. And then it happened. Claire rose with a flourish, announcing she had something special just for Evelyn. She moved to the bar cart, her hands moving with practiced elegance, ice cubes chiming, citrus slices dropping, herbs pressed into liquid. She stirred slowly, like a ritual, before returning with a pale pink drink garnished with rosemary. She placed it in front of me, smiling as if she had gifted me the world. "This one's just for you, my own recipe." I met her eyes and returned the smile, but mine was different. Not warm, not grateful. Still, measured, unreadable. I lifted the glass briefly, set it down untouched, and waited. Eleanor was distracted, talking about renovations. Matthew laughed at something on his phone. No one was watching. In that sliver of distraction, I reached across, lifted Eleanor's identical glass, and switched it with mine. Smooth, seamless, silent. No one noticed. The table carried on, oblivious. Inside me, there was no fear, only clarity. For months, I had doubted, questioned, documented. Tonight, the truth would reveal itself. Not in whispers, not in notebooks, but in daylight. Eleanor lifted her new glass without hesitation, clinked it lightly against her mimosa, and drank deeply. I folded my hands in my lap, calm as a stone, and watched. 35 minutes. I knew the pattern by heart. The conversation carried on, but I heard little. I counted breaths, measured pauses, studied her face. And then the first crack appeared. Eleanor faltered mid-sentence, blinking twice as if the room had shifted around her. She cleared her throat, waved it off as wine. Minutes later, her cheeks flushed crimson, her hand trembling as she reached for water. Matthew finally looked up, concern shadowing his face. Claire's smile froze, not reaching her eye. Floor, their voices sharp with urgency. Eleanor lay pale, her breathing shallow, her pulse erratic. Claire hovered, wringing her hands, her voice too high as she explained. "It must be low blood sugar, maybe the wine." But the EMT paused when I calmly lifted the glass meant for me, the one still untouched. "This is what she gave me," I said, my tone steady. The room froze. Claire's eyes snapped toward me, panic sharp in her face, her composure cracking for the first time. They bagged the glass, asked questions, and I answered with precision. Every item served. Who cooked? Who poured? The timing. The symptoms. I spoke plainly, without anger, just facts. Claire, however, couldn't stop fidgeting. She interrupted, offered excuses, tried to shift the story. "She's always been forgetful," she insisted, her voice trembling. "Maybe she switched the drinks herself." The officer taking notes didn't react, but I saw his pen move steadily across the page. Within hours, the police took not only the drink but also the vitamin bottles and supplements I had saved. When I handed them my spiral notebook, months of careful documentation, the young detective flipped through the pages. His face betrayed nothing, but his voice softened. "You've been preparing for this a long time." I nodded once, silently. At last, my quiet performance had an audience that mattered. The toxicology results came back swiftly. The drink contained a benzodiazepine derivative, a sedative often used for anxiety, dangerous when mixed with alcohol. Traces of the same compound appeared in the supplements I had sealed away. Claire's perfect image began to fracture under the weight of evidence. When confronted, she denied, twisted words, claimed she only wanted me to rest more. But slowly, under questioning, the truth leaked through like water through cracked glass. Her confession came in fragments. The pills, the tampered drinks, the staged concern. And then the larger revelation, the plan. For over a year, she and Eleanor had been documenting my decline, collecting moments of confusion and forgetfulness they had engineered. Their goal was clear: to build a case for guardianship, to control not just me, but the estate my husband had left in my name. Properties undeniable, crushing him as much as it crushed me. Still, one truth lingered, unanswered. If they had come this far, how much further would they have gone if I hadn't switched the glass? What might have been left of me, of my name, my life, my legacy, had I swallowed that drink? The silence that followed the confession was thicker than any scream, and it left one question burning in my mind. Would justice be enough to heal the wound my own son allowed to grow? When the hearings began, I did not attend every session. I had already lived the story, endured the poison, and carried the silence. The legal system would do what it must, but I no longer needed to prove anything. My journals, the glass, the pills, all of it spoke louder than I ever could. And still, inside me, there lingered a quiet ache, not for justice, but for the son I had raised, the boy who once promised to take care of me. Matthew visited me once after the investigation unfolded. He stood on my porch holding papers in his hands, his shoulders hunched like a man stripped of armor. "She didn't mean to hurt you, Mom," he whispered, as though saying it softly might make it true. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not malice, but weakness, the kind that lets evil bloom unchecked. I turned away, too tired to argue. Sometimes betrayal is not what people do, but what they allow. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild a life far from their reach. I rented a cottage by the sea, a quiet place where no one knew me as the woman who almost lost everything over a cocktail. I planted rosemary in the backyard. Every time I watered it, I remembered the night of the switch, the 35 minutes that changed everything. And I reminded myself that survival is sometimes the most powerful revenge. I rewrote my will with a steady hand. Claire and Eleanor's names were erased entirely, removed like rot before it spread further. Matthew's name too was gone, not out of hate, but out of clarity. I left what remained of my estate to my granddaughter, tucked away in a trust no one else could touch. I wanted her to inherit not just money, but the truth. That silence can protect as much as does not always roar with anger. It often whispers with a smile. And survival is not always about fighting louder. It is about waiting, recording, and knowing when to act. I took back my power not by shouting, but by standing still and letting the truth speak. So I ask you, if someone close to you handed you a glass, would you question what's inside, or would you drink without doubt? Sometimes the smallest hesitation, the quietest act of suspicion, is the line between erasure and endurance. And if this story touched you, share it. Leave a comment with your thoughts, your own moments of silence, your own lessons learned. Subscribe for more stories of family, betrayal, and resilience, because each tale holds a mirror we can all see ourselves in. Until next time, remember, silence is not weakness when truth is on your side.